back being recorded again, so I welcome everybody to the meeting. Hi, remind the Southland Civil Defence Emergency Management Group meeting, and ask for apologies. And I understand there's an apology from Mayor Shadbolt and Mayor Hatley.
Neville, just confirming Mayor Shadbolt's got his mother-in-law's funeral today.
So Albie Clark is representing ICC today.
Thank you.
Apology from Chief Executive Cameron McIntosh.
Any further apologies?
Steve Perry.
Sorry?
Steve Perry.
Steve Perry, right. Okay, so move for the apologies be received.
I'll move that way.
Thank you.
Happy to second that, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Gary. All those in favour?
Aye.
You will be.
Aye.
Declarations of interest about matters before the committee today. If not, any public forums, petitions and deputations? And there do not seem to be any. Much more difficult for people to do that when we're on Zoom. They don't come along to the site. We have confirmation of the minutes from the 18th of November, which is our last time that we met.
We can move those, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mayor Hicks. I'll second that from the chair. So is there any discussion on that motion? That it's a true and correct record of that meeting for that time? It's a wee while ago now. If not, put the motion. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Carried. Right, extraordinary and urgent business, supplementary reports and other. No supplementaries? Good. Move on from that. Any questions? Okay. The chairman's report. I've actually got one this time, which is most unusual. But we had a visit from Minister Kerry Allen, responsible for emergency management, civil defence for the government, and made a presentation to her and her group, which I thought went very well. She was very receptive. We've also had a visit from MP Jerry Brownlee and MP Joseph Mooney last week, talking about the Southland floods and our response to those. And Craig Sinclair put on an excellent presentation about that. I'm sorry, we should welcome Rochelle from NEMA this morning, so to acknowledge that you're here.
Thank you.
So, item 9 on the agenda is the reports, the Coordinating Executive Group Chair report.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, through you, Mr. Chair. There's been 2 meetings, one in the 27th of January, and I'll take it as read as what we covered there, and also last week on the 13th of May. A number of matters were covered there, and we'll be revisiting some of those in this meeting as well.
Okay, was there any questions or commentary around the item 1?
Happy to move its receipt, Mr. Chair.
Mayor Hicks. Moved by Mayor Hicks, seconded by
I can do that, Mr. Chair.
Thanks very much. Unless there's any further conversation, I'll put the motion. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Thank you. Item 2, the drought coordination response.
Thank you, through you, Mr. Chair. As we all know, we assisted on the drought response. We've put together a final drought report for the Merrill Forum that we'll be finalising and sending out hopefully later this week. I suppose the issues that we cover in this, when we made the action plan, we had to look at what would be the time where we'd actually move away from the coordination and then properly give it over to MPI and Rural Support Trust, who normally run these drought things. There were 6 events that actually made us move to this area. That was the aquifer started recharging. The recent weather had increased the rain events. COVID restrictions were moved down from red to orange. The RMA water shortage notice was removed. Council water restrictions had been removed. And seasonal weather, that's the weather we're experiencing right at the moment, was going to provide greater rainfall. As you know, there was no state of emergency. However, there was a drought classification, which was made on the 31st of March by Honourable Damien O'Connor, the Minister for Agriculture. And it basically made Southland a medium-scale drought. And if you know a bit about the droughts, which I found out because we had gone down this line before, medium scale is basically regional rather than large scale, which would be interregional or national. We are assisting, or we're still assisting the Rural Support Trust, especially around making meetings and ensuring that their use of teams is appropriate, and they've, MPI have put in a recovery manager, Fiona Comer. We've got a couple of things here that we looked at the 4 environments being social, built, economic and natural, and there's a number of suggestions in the report that we will provide later on that we think would be quite prudent to look at, including possibly looking at the climate change scenario and having a climatologist look to see if the same weather pattern that's been around for the last 3 years remains, and we could possibly predict a lower rainfall for the next year. Thankfully, in talking to Chris Jenkins just yesterday, he's done quite a bit of work on looking at long-term predictions through aquifer levels of a hydrological drought. So that's an interesting piece of work that we'll be keeping an eye on at the moment. So I think the meteorological reports provided by George Lewis, I think it was, from the Met Service were well received and gave a good picture at the time.
Very good.
Yeah, and it was, although it was a cost, it was a cost that we felt was good to give us a really good situational awareness.
Any idea what that was?
I think it was about $2,000 or $3,000.
It's probably, I found it incredibly valuable.
Yeah. And we followed that up with a public a public meeting where a meteorologist came in and said, this is how we do warnings, etc. And then they were able to explain what Southland was facing for the next couple of months as well.
I might be showing my ignorance here, but when you talk about a hydrological drought, what's the difference between a hydrological drought and a drought?
Yeah, so I'm no expert in this area, but my understanding is it's a lack of water, which I know sounds the same as the normal drought, but it's driven by not as severe weather conditions. So a meteorological drought would be where you have like dust bowls and dead grass, etc., whereas a hydrological is the very slow depreciation of aquifers and rivers. Yeah.
It's a very good way for it.
Yeah, well, I hope I'm somewhere on the money on that.
I feel so.
Be close.
Yeah. And then we've just got a list of contacts that we made sure that we kept in contact with, and that was our Rural Support Trust friends, the Southern Regional Leadership Group, Welfare Coordination Group, and the Lifelines utilities. So we can provide that in the next week.
Thank you, Simon. I've a couple of comments there. One is the learnings that we got from this about how we might manage droughts in the future. But I think it highlights the value of this organisation, the combined organisation of all the Southland councils, able to assist in events short of declaring an emergency. It's interesting, government are looking at changing legislation now to allow for events which are less than a civil defence emergency under the present rules, so that there will be some powers available to assist communities. And this is obviously one of those events. So it's didn't justify declaring an emergency, but it needed input and support from councils. The Mayoral Forum was useful for getting the Minister's attention for getting some money for rural support people.
I think it's really shown the connection between the local authorities in this part of the world and what happens in other parts of the country. It's good.
Well, it's a credit to the local government in this area that everybody's working together. Yeah.
Sorry, I'm just having trouble picking up Mayor Tracy, but no. Yeah, great work with the whole response. I you mentioned the word learnings, Neville or Mr. Chair, and I just wonder whether we should have that there instead of negatives under the unable to source a PIM, difficult to look at transition, which I agree with it all, but if somebody was to read that, they're not really negatives, they're learnings, if that makes sense. I know it's just a word, but to touch on the whole thing, you know, Federated Farmers called it a perfect storm. It was, and I congratulate the team for working together, especially under the COVID restrictions as well. So a big thank you.
Thank you, Kerry. Is there any further discussion of item 2? Would you like to move the recommendation?
That's for me, Neville.
No.
In one of the previous meetings we had, and it might have been around the actual drought itself, Lloyd from ES raised 2 issues, which I think now that the conditions have been taken away, still need some consideration. One of them was the issue of winter feed, and the cost of winter feed was the big one. But the other thing he raised was that even if the rain came, and it has come, the grass recovery for next spring will still be impacted. And I wonder whether we've still got our eyes set on what that means for farmers. Now, I'm not in a position to talk about that, but I do remember him talking about it.
I can make a comment.
Thank you, Roma.
Chair. So, kia ora Nobby, I'm Wilma Faulkner. I might have met you occasionally in large groups, but not at a meeting like this. We've had, following the drought, we've brought together a group of the sector group that were represented at the meeting with the ministers, and there is a program of work together around, well, there always is a program of work around winter grazing, but we've extended that this year to actually include the conversation and actions in relation to support for reduced feed and what wintering means this year, well beyond that. So there's an active piece of work there going on at the moment with ourselves in the sector.
Yeah, thank you. That was one of the issues. But the other issue, which is beyond my technical knowledge, was that Lloyd also raised the issue that while we get the rain, and even if we get the winter feed, there is some ongoing impact for, I presume, with grass growth for spring. That it's not just a short-term fix if you get the rain. He said, I remember him saying that if you get rain through a drought, it takes about 7 to 9 days or 7 to 10 days for the grass to start to grow again. But he said there will be an impact in spring next year.
I think you're right, but listening to the radio, Hokanui radio, and farming people speaking live on that, saying that the grass growth has happened because the soil temperatures have stayed up.
Yep.
And they've had some water, but the aquifers are going to take a lot more than just one season to recharge properly. So there could be some issues next year with water supplies if those aquifers don't get recharged. Grass growth is continuing just at the moment. So farmers are a bit more positive, but we can't make the grass grow. We can be aware that there may be issues, but there's not much we can do to correct them.
Yeah, I guess Neville, Chair, what I was signalling was that it's easy to sort of take the brakes off now and say, well, we're past the crisis and all these things that we had in place are being pulled back. But I'm just signaling that there may be some longer term stuff that we need to consider. Certainly the Met people that spoke to us at one of the meetings recently did say that aqua impact was huge. It could take, up to a decade to recover. So I guess just keeping that to the fore for people that might think it's all over and done with, especially the ministerial people, would be good.
So, Mr. Chair, can I just suggest perhaps that given we've got an active group working in the sector and with Environment Southland around these matters, that perhaps would you like a part of that in your chairman's report for future meetings so that you can update this group on what the actions may be? Councillor Clark, about that. I mean, I think that could be quite useful to you, just so that you know that there is action going on.
Yeah, I think that's a good,
Yeah.
it's a valid point that I've raised, and that would be one assistance to it.
Yes, because it includes a lot of the rural sector agencies, but also the rural support trusts.
Yeah, I think it's already been acknowledged that the Met Service have gone from strength to strength over the last 2 or 3 years even, and their ability to forecast further into the future and to get it pretty right. I have to say I'm quite impressed with some of the stuff that I hear from them.
Yeah.
So hopefully they'll be able to assist us when we come into spring. That's where we're going. We hope that the drought pattern that we've had isn't going to be a recurring one. Are there any more questions or commentary? We're going to move for the recommendation, please, that we note this report.
Very happy to move the recommendation, Mr. Chair, and I'd like to comment there about a useful response to have the team thinking creatively. I think we all had to.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor Tom. Seconded by Mayor Hicks. All those in favour? Aye. Item 3 is the group plan update, compiled by Simon Mann.
Yes, thank you, and through you, Mr. Chair. As you probably know, our group plan update is due this year. And unfortunately, it hits a year where the national plan is still in review. So part of the trifecta program that NEMA are running at the moment include some adjustments to the national plan. And we're not 100% sure what those plans are, but our group plan must give effect to the national plan. So there's a number of groups that find themselves in this same situation. Some have been in this situation for 5 years. What doesn't change, however, is our hazard scape. And what we're doing at the moment is we're adopting the new risk framework, or the risk assessment framework, which involves a number of steps to actually then create a hazard scape for Southland. And attached to this report is the start of the maximum credible events. So what the idea behind these are is we get a number of experts from the councils to come along, and we talk through what a maximum credible event may be, and there's a number of them listed on the next page, including things like tsunami, earthquake, etc. We've, with a bit of information that we got from doing the drought, we've gone beyond stuff that we can do emergencies in, but we thought it would be a good idea to engage in events where our services may be called upon to actually just kind of start thinking outside the box on that. So we've included drought, we've included, I believe, a terrorist attack, aquamarine pests, human pandemics, and water supply failure and dam ruptures, etc. So we've gone quite wide on this. Then we present the maximum credible events to subject matter experts, and they rate this in with their own subject matter expertise in a rateable risk scale. So the likelihood against the impact. Once we've done that, we then search through what can be done about it. So the consequence, the what kind of element. And then we start aligning our consequences up so that we can invest a lot of time in a consequence that will cover many risks. So for instance, if it's a mass evacuation plan at Southport, we can start looking into how would we do that, and possibly steer away from some of the other hazards that have unique consequences themselves, and we will actually, although we'll highlight them, we will plan for the worst first, I suppose. So at the moment, what you're looking at there is the maximum credible events. It does, the AEP is an annual exceedance probability, and the likelihood is just a guesstimate, basically. So it's all this risk assessment at the moment, and it will be fine-tuned as we move through the process.
So can I just ask you for drought, we haven't got an AEP on that?
No, because for Southland drought, it was really hard to actually put an AEP on it, annual exceedance probability, but I think it would be less than once. But with climate change, we're not 100% sure at the moment. We'll probably reevaluate that as time goes on.
So depending on when this was written, I see on the last page, civil unrest, terrorism and cyber attack is less than 1% or unlikely.
Mm-hmm.
Would you reassess that now in light of the news of the last couple of weeks even?
Yeah.
The parliamentary protest, the increasing cyber attacks going on?
Through you, Mr. Chair, that is a possibility, and this is where we have the subject matter experts such as the police to come along and give us some advice on that. I suppose it's really important that I point out that this is a regional context, so we'll be looking over the entire region. So some things that may impact a local area quite significantly may not impact the region. So at the start, we go through the regional process. What we then plan to do is go through to the community hubs and actually start doing a risk assessment on the local issues.
Can I just ask, what was the date that this?
So this maximum credible event, I believe, came in last week.
So Simon, in your preamble, you talked about timing of this and how it interacts with the national situation, and some areas some regions being in the state for 5 years. So how does that work when there's no connection?
Now, I must apologise, I'm not 100% sure if I'm entirely correct in what I'm about to say, but I believe if you have started the planning for the particular group plan update, then and you have a reason why you cannot progress with that, then I believe it's accepted that you're in that your old one is still in force, and you're actually moving towards a new one.
So if there's a number of regions finding themselves in this situation, does NEMA have a view on how we get out of this so that there is a functioning plan at a regional level and at a national level that's coordinated?
Yeah, so NEMA are working on the group plan, the national plan at the moment through the Trifecta program. I believe their body of work, and I'm looking at Rochelle a lot here, I believe their body of work at the moment is focusing on the CDEM Act. And once they have that done and dusted, they will move on to the national plan. I think that's the case, although I'm sure they've got people working on both.
Engagement and working groups for the national plan have begun. So that program of work is underway this year, and that part of the Trifecta program. And so just coming back to the reviewing of group plans, I am aware that, different groups are tackling it differently, with some sort of starting or putting a bit of a light touch, but in somewhat just taking time to align with the national plan when it comes forward.
So the work that's going on at a national level, is there a time frame for that? Or is that just something that just goes on all the time?
Yeah, no, there is a time frame. I cannot give you the definite time frame as to when that national plan will come out. But as far as the Act and that Trifecta program, that engagement has been underway. There was a small update I provided in my report, which I can speak to after, but later in the year, there'll be opportunity to go to select committee to talk about the Act. But the plan gives effect to the Act. So once the Act is finalised, then the plan looks at how we deliver to the Act. So yeah, bit of a process, but it's all in train right now.
And I think NEMA has, the Minister has actually pushed it out, recognising the fact that there's local body elections this year. So they've pushed it out to go beyond that, so that anybody elected can be part of that conversation.
So is there any further discussion on the plan? Thank you.
You could have identified that Neva's fault before I bought a property in Garston.
Neville, just a passing comment. It seems odd that that national plans on this issue, which identify potential risks, are the front runner to the Act actually getting through the Select Committee. Most Acts do it the other way around. There's a general, I guess, a philosophy that the government wants to promote, be it emergency management, and then through the Select Committee process, being that there's 2 hearings in the Select Committees, as the Act goes through the House, people can put up stuff, and then from that you do your, I guess, your national, and then local regional plans or whatever you want to be. It just seems an odd way around. It sort of leads me to think that maybe the government are not quite sure what they're wanting to legislate about, so we'll get some national plans first. Have I got that wrong?
Well, that's the process that's been described, I think.
Yep.
The Act goes first and then the plan gives effect to the Act.
Okay.
Yes, yeah, so, yeah.
Yeah, I picked that up wrong when you were discussing it. Thank you.
Sorry.
The Minister was seeking feedback to or responses to the proposed legislation, which were provided from this group. But she was also asking when she visited here about that.
Yeah.
So they are listening, and that will influence the legislation, I'm sure. Well, I'll move from the chair that the group plan update item 3 is as it says, noted.
Happy to second that, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mayor Hicks. Is everybody in favour of that?
All right.
Thank you. Thank you, Simon. Changes to the AF8 program. Followed by Simon now.
Yeah, thank you. And through you, Mr. Chair, we had a recent steering group meeting that was held in earlier this year, where Brian Patton stood down as the steering group chair, and I was elected to the role. So this again synchronises what Angus had with the steering group and the emergency management Southland looking after the actual project. Part of the changes that we've looked at making in consultation with Alice was to provide a quarterly update, and there should be you should be looking at the quarterly update at the moment. There's a number of interesting developments within the AF8 program, and one of the biggest ones obviously is the fact that we were supplied a number of funds from the National Emergency Management Agency, or NEMA, to assist in looking at the response, the planning area. So we're looking at the intelligence and insights and the communications and engagements role. Another item that we're looking at the moment through the AF8 program is the response planning groups. Now, a number of these are already up and running. The welfare RPG is meeting fortnightly, as is the Lifelines RPG, so the response planning groups. And what we're looking at there is what effects a major rupture across the South Island would mean for these particular areas, especially in the Lifelines. I do understand from those Lifelines meetings that the Lifelines are pumping a lot of resources into the planning to ensure that they can lessen the effects of an alpine fault rupturing. So we're also looking at other groups. NEMA has employed a planner as well, so we're looking at possibly a group to deal with health effects. and emergency services is paused at the moment until the new NEMA planner is on board, which I believe has happened, and she is employed now. A couple of other just housekeeping matters, and there has been a media update through North and South, I believe it is, and that is available online at the moment, although we've all had a look at it and it does take some downloading, so it's quite heavy in the GIS platform. Lastly, as I said before, sorry, there is a couple of housekeeping matters with just how we use Teams and how we can get the information out to all of the participants on that, and that's provided for in this report.
It was interesting that AF8 actually began as an informal networking of CDM managers across the South Island, and it has developed from there to the stage where it's actually recognised on a national basis now, and some funding is coming through, which is necessary to keep it going because there's some really good work being done there. You know, one of the outcomes from the earlier planning was when we had the floods, Milford, the closure of Milford last year, that the planning for AF8 enabled the evacuation of several hundred people out of the area around Milford Sound, and that was part of the AF8 planning. That's what led to it. So it's good. The Minister was quite interested. I did gather that the MPs of this last week weren't fully aware of it.
No, I think
I had that impression. So we made the point of informing them.
I believe the Southland floods basically consumed most of the media, I suppose, time, and the Milford side of things was actually forgotten a wee bit. So the fact that it was the largest air evacuation ever performed in New Zealand of civilians, and the fact that nobody lost their luggage, I think was a thing, because they had to limit the amount of luggage they could put on the helicopters, and then they transported the luggage at a later stage and got it back to the owners. So I think that was a proud time for EMS.
Well, Craig Sinclair prepared a presentation for the MPs, which is well worth watching. Nice pictures of Mayor Tolman. They're taking a personal interest in the flooding on Milford Road. But, you know, there was 100 and something cars stranded on the road, and they were all retrieved and returned to their various owners, mostly rentals. And people, there was no one left in the bush or in huts or washed away, which was a credit to
No
everybody.
loss of life, yeah.
So on the communication and engagement front, talks there about a public education project beginning 2nd of May, is it? So what is that about? What does that look like? I certainly haven't seen anything.
Yeah, so that I can send you the link to that. That's I believe that's the story map that the North and South have put together.
So North and South are talking about the magazine?
The magazine,
Oh.
yeah. And I think a lot of the money that they've used is from New Zealand On Air or something along those lines. The Lot on the Plates, the social media campaign, is a different forum which is available, I believe, on YouTube. I'm not sure if we've I'm not 100% sure that has kicked off just yet, but I can make inquiries into that.
So I don't believe there is a general awareness in the public of the seriousness of this situation, or the potential seriousness of this might happen.
We've had people employed now for several years promoting AF8 and the effects right across the South Island, particularly in schools and community groups. We had We had one presentation down here in Invercargill last year with something like about 200 people came to that.
Yeah, in excess of 200
In excess of 200 people came to that. So we've got an active program, although it was interesting that what came out of that was the biggest concern the local community had was about tsunami risk down here. But again, it shows that people are aware. But there is an ongoing education program right around the South Island.
I know you can't get to everybody, and most people, even if it's going to affect them dramatically, are still not interested until it happens. But if and when it does happen, there'll be a resounding call for what the hell, we knew nothing about this, why didn't you tell us, sort of stuff. But I guess you just got to live with that.
I think we can only do what we can do, and as I say, we're getting some additional funding now from government, from NEMA, supporting the program, so that enables us to keep the education program going, which is the main thrust of AFA.
I'm not criticising it at all.
No, that's fine, you're quite correct, that's the way it goes. But, you know, the likelihood of an earthquake within a reasonable time frame has risen from something like 28% to 69%. And they're doing active measurement of the fault over on the west coast. And you can actually see that on YouTube. You can see interesting videos of them drilling into the Alpine Fault and getting more information all the time and discovering more about when it might move again and how much and in which direction. Yeah, the science is improving. Are there any more commentary or questions about the AFA report?
Thanks for getting on board there, Simon.
Sorry, I missed that bit.
Good on you for getting involved in that. Thank you.
Congratulations.
I think I was the person that didn't say no quick enough. Yeah.
Never put in an apology.
Okay,
I'm happy to move the recommendation.
thank you, Mayor Hicks. Seconded by
Okay, I'll do that. Sorry.
Mayor Tom, thank you. All those in favour? Aye. Thank you, Simon. Annual survey. Item 5.
Thank you, through you, Mr. Chair. There is a KPI where we have to look towards 60% of a researched group being prepared for an emergency. We've done that internally for a few years prior to my employment, and there was some concern that we weren't actually addressing the entirety of the Southland public, or not a fair amount of people. We did tend to heavily look at face-to-face surveys at outside supermarkets. So there were a certain demographic that we were getting but not being represented in others. It was decided that we would look at going to an outside organisation to assist us with the survey. And what we've provided here is just the questions we asked in that survey. There's a number of reasons we brought this to the attention of today. One of them is we wanted you to know the questions that we were asking. The second part of it is we've included a number of ones that, although don't specifically mention, there are a couple that specifically mention AFA. We've asked a few questions in relation to how people feel they're prepared for a big incident and how long they can survive themselves. And we're looking towards the AFA rupture for that. The idea behind that is that those questions will be repeated. Most CDEM groups actually do surveys that are very similar to this, and they will be repeated in their own survey. So we should get a good understanding to answer Mayor Tracy's question about how engaged people are with the AFA once we have the feedback from all of those surveys. At this particular stage, we don't have the feedback for this survey, but that should be coming in the next 2 weeks. What we did get is we've already had positive feedback, as you can see from the email on the front, because we wanted to get people into certain understandings by just asking questions, and one of them was about going to a school for a civil defence centre, which is something that we don't do anymore, and also tsunami sirens, which we don't have. We now rely heavily on the EMAs. So we just thought we'd bring that to your understanding so that you could see that what we're asking and just why it is, and at the next joint committee meeting we'll bring the results.
Thank you, Simon.
Is there a national alert test this weekend?
May the 22nd.
May 22nd.
And I'm going to tentatively look at Rochelle, who will either agree or disagree with me. 22nd, isn't it? Yeah, May the 20th. So we will all be getting an EMA on our phones.
Between 6 and 7 p.m.
Stop whatever you're doing and read the message.
Yes.
Yeah. And
It's interesting that the civil defence over the years have built into people's consciousness that we'll have sirens and that schools are the welfare centres. I have an opinion about whether or not we should still have sirens. I think we should, because they're effective, but the fire service don't agree with it at all. But, you know, welfare centres need to be known to the community. As I say, they naturally gravitate through history, they'll go to a school. So that might be something we need to promote too. All right, so if anybody rings me, I'll know the answers to all the questions, I hope. 22 of them.
Thought that comment was interesting, Chair, because I remember last year seeing a report out of Northland, or not a report, just a TV report out of Northland, where people were galloping up into the higher parts of the peninsula to get away from a pending tsunami, and they had the alarms. And some of the people commented on, one, they did in some of these low decile areas, they don't have cell phones, or they don't have coverage. So Vodafone's got a much poorer level of coverage than, say, Spark. And so they were quite appreciative that they knew what the alarms meant, and people were getting into cars with some basic supplies and getting to high land. So the cell phones are great, but they're not the be-all and end-all either.
No, you're correct. The sirens are still being used in some parts of the country. And it might be that Bluff and Riverton and places like that on the coast might retain them for tsunami warnings.
Yes, through you, Mr. Chair, I know historically there's a number of issues with running sirens, and certain things like maintenance, they can trigger themselves. There's been a number of areas. What the approach nationally has been now is the long, strong, get gone message. So basically, if you feel an earthquake that is either long or strong, go to higher ground. And you're in a coastal area, sorry, go to higher ground. So I think the reliance is not only on the EMAs, so that's the electronic mobile alerts, but also that messaging of the long, strong and get gone. And I think when we looked at the Northland Kermadec rupture and the impending or the possibility of a tsunami, a lot of people went with before the EMA was even put out due to that messaging.
I was only
You'll probably find on my old desk there somewhere in a report that I did on that, and I totally agree with you, Simon. The inquiries I did when I was employed with Emergency Management Southland showed that there were too many issues outside of just getting them, too many issues.
Thank you. And the results, you think you'll have feedback within a couple of weeks?
Yes, yeah.
Thank you. I'll move from the chair that we note the report. That's the annual survey report, item 5. Do I have a seconder?
I'll second that.
Yeah, thank you. We all agreed motion that it be noted?
Right.
Thank you. Item 6, Whakaari White Island, and the decision that's come out of that. Do you want to talk about that, Simon?
Yeah. Thank you, through you, Mr. Chair. There are a number of media reports in relation to the WorkSafe prosecution of NEMA recently put not only on visual media but also on Stuff, I believe, in which it reported that the Crown Law Counsel for NEMA was quoted as saying something akin to, it's not NEMA's responsibility to do WorkSafe for something like White Island. It is more the groups that are operational in this area. So that did stir up a bit of concern within the groups, in the fact that and the next item is talking about the partnership charter, that we're talking about NEMA, and we were a bit concerned that NEMA was devolving all responsibility of any kind of emergency onto groups and then basically washing its hands of that. What we've been assured by both the CE of NEMA and the 2IC, so Dave Gawn and Gary Knowles, that was a snippet, and I think anybody that has been involved in a court process, when the media is reporting it, they'll take the snippet that suits the media item and then leave the rest out. The discussion point in that from the CE and both the 2IC of NEMA was there was a lot more discussion around the particular argument, and the argument was that neither NEMA or the groups fit within the health and safety legislation. And that is, the charges were dismissed in the end. And I think if you read, basically this is an abridged version of what the judge said, but basically it came down to the fact that the Health and Safety at Work Act does not necessarily equate to things like White Island and other areas. Obviously, being in the South Island and having the AFA, this concern is quite a lot. So it was good that the charges were dismissed, and I just thought we'd highlight this here, just in case somebody saw that and was concerned that NEMA was discussing basically devolving itself of responsibility and putting it onto the groups.
Well, I saw the charges that had been brought to a number of agencies on WorkSafe. I think that's a very wide net, and I can't understand the legal basis for some of it, so I was interested to see that the court agrees with me. Yeah, no, that's a good outcome and very clearly explained.
The noting of that report, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Max. Seconded by
Happy to second that.
your time. Thank you. All those in favour? Aye. Done. Thank you. So we've got item 7, which is the National Emergency Management Agency update.
Thank
Oh,
you.
by Simon, mate.
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Chair. The group managers and NEMA have been working for quite some time on this partnership charter, and there's been a number of issues that have slowly been ironed out, and unfortunately the previous item which we were discussing did not do much to initially assist on this, but once we had the explanation, I think it makes a lot more sense. The idea behind this partnership charter is to get a really good, clear line of communications between NEMA and the groups. Obviously, if in the past the relationship has been somewhat fractured, and I guess the reason for the partnership charter is because communications were not happening as well as they should. And this really outlines just where NEMA, from a point of view where they sit as the steward, but basically to assist us from a national perspective to respond to emergencies or events. And it just covers other areas where our partner aspirations and our partnership focus areas will be concentrating on. Shortly after that partnership charter, I believe there is a NEMA update.
Is Michelle going to provide that for us?
Yes,
Yes, thank you.
I'm more than happy to speak to this and can take it as read as well, and already in our conversations a couple of these items have been raised. But yeah, if I just circle back and draw your attention to that trifecta program and update there. So you will remember earlier in this year there was some engagement and there was some feedback submitted on behalf of the region, and the process to give feedback to select committee has been pushed out. The timeframes were very tight. They aligned with local government elections. They are now pushed out to enable input post-elections, and mindful too of the timeframe heading into summer. However, there was the intent that it would suit the likes of yourselves a lot better to be involved at that time of the year versus that very, very busy point during local government elections. As Simon's mentioned, the partnership charter, which has been a piece of work and a journey to get to that point, and obviously, like Simon's talked to, a journey moving forward and just looking at how we continue to strengthen that relationship as we work together. Some comms around our Get Ready website, and it was Sign Language Week last week, and there was quite a lot of engagement happening in that space, which was great to see, and just looking at how we continue to get our messaging across all of those streams and be inclusive of all of our diverse communities. And then finally, the emergency mobile alert happening on Sunday the 22nd. So yeah, if you've got any questions, happy to answer them.
All seems very clear. Thank you, Rochelle.
Thank you.
With your blessing, Chair, if I could just go back to the previous item, which I've just given some thought to, which was the work-safe prosecution of NEMA.
Just before we do that, can we just finish this item?
Yep.
So item 7, the Emergency Management Agency update. Does the recommendations that we receive that update?
Yeah, happy to move that.
Moved by me, seconded by me.
Second that.
Gary Todd can do that. And we're all in favour? Thank you, Michelle. So, with the agreement of the meeting, we move back on to item 6.
Yeah, just a thought, Chair, that Simon might be able to give us some advice on at a later stage was, I've worked in the Health and Safety and Employment Act area, and it seems with White Island there are two types of liability. One is the liability for workers that work in that area, as opposed to, I guess, tourists that were going out to the island. And it seems to me that, and I don't know the specifics of the case or what the court subsequently ruled, but it would seem to me that if you're an employer, you have under the Act an obligation to your employees to identify risks, to remove those risks, or to minimise them. So if we're thinking about AF8, for argument's sake, and we have a high risk area, and I don't know where that might be, but let's say it's Milford Sound, do we have some obligations under that Act, given that decision that's been made by the courts? Or are we absolved from those under that? So I don't have the answer to any of those things, but wonder whether there's some thinking that needs to take place going forward, because it's better be prepared for these things as opposed to suddenly be ending up in a situation where WorkSafe is trying to prosecute you in court.
Well, thank you for raising that, but that, courts are going to determine the levels or areas of liability, but in terms of profit, and I'm sure Mayor Tong will be able to enlighten you about that. There's quite a bit of work going on there, all related to health and safety of the people working, living and visiting Milford Sound.
Yep.
And mitigation is being applied. There's plans by the developer change. Perhaps, Gary, you might have talked to it more knowledgeably than me.
Well, I think, are you referring to the work that's been done with the Department of Conservation and Milford Tourism, et cetera, Mr. Chairman? Is that?
That's correct.
So that is the emphasis is on obviously the safety of the tourists as well as the visitors as well as the those that live in there, and there's been work done, Nobby, to identify where escape routes, et cetera, might go. Okay. The obvious major one is what a tsunami would do in there with a landslide after a earthquake or just a natural one through a weather bomb. So the team in there that live, work and play in there are well up with what the concerns are. That's what would happen with the visitors should something of a disaster occur. I hope that helps.
Yep, yeah, it's fine, thank you.
And I think the Milford Development Group are very conscious of their responsibilities towards the people in there and working their plans accordingly.
Yeah, the issue we have is the transient type of workers or employees in there, and it's dealt with at the start of each season.
Yep. Thank you for that. Thank you for raising that, Nobby.
Yeah, just as a comment back to Gary, and I don't want to interfere with your development group, but there are some risks around all that. So it's all very well, and this is not a negative comment, but it's all very well to have, say for argument's sake, reception staff at Milford or hotel staff or whatever up with the play and even doing something with the visitors. But you do have casual people that come on site, bus drivers, there's a whole raft of them, isn't it? And the legislation's really wide. If you're an employer anywhere, employer or staff, you can be caught out by people that come on site. That PCBU stuff is quite wide. So yeah,
I totally get that, and that's just wherever you go, even driving through the Nevis and a rock falls on your bus. You know, it's just case of us. Unfortunately, at times we just don't know what's happening.
yeah, sure. Thank you.
Thank you. We move on then to item 8, which is subject of the next meeting. Some of us may not be at the next meeting because you probably won't have a meeting before the elections.
Yeah.
Anything could happen.
Yeah.
You might have to train a whole new team.
I thought you were providing me some information I didn't know about
No.
the security of my role.
Yeah.
It's not your security we're talking about.
That's actually a valid point, though, Mr. Chair, that we probably won't be able to have a meeting, will we?
No. Well, normally we wouldn't have one prior, on our normal timeframe prior to the elections.
So would it be prudent to have one prior to the elections or not?
Well, I suppose that's what I'm raising, that we should be considering whether we should do that. We should probably have a meeting in September or something, the end of September, just to have a tidy up, because it will be, whatever happens, some of us will be a new team.
I think that's a very good idea.
Yeah, I think we need to have a, as you say, a tidy up before batons are passed over, or whatever happens. I totally agree.
Well, enable Simon as the manager to be prepared for the new team. So can I suggest that we have, say, we pick a last week of September or something like that to have a meeting while we're all still able to sit at the table?
Yep, and it is a public meeting, so that may allow any contenders for council or the mayoral positions to attend and just see what happens and maybe catch up.
That's a good point.
I think it's a great idea.
Okay, so can we resolve at a time which will be notified to say the last week of September we have a meeting of this group?
Happy to.
I'm seconded by Mayor Hicks.
Happy to second that.
Simon will give us a date. Prepare an agenda.
Sure. So the Thursday, the 29th?
29. Tentatively set 29th of September. Next meeting. All right, thank you. Now, there's no further business on the agenda for this meeting. There's no restricted ordinary business, no restricted business. So I'll declare that the meeting is concluded. Thank you for your attendance and your participation. We'll see you in September.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you for coming along and supporting us.
Happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
Right.
Cool, thank you. Tracy, can you give me a ring if you get a chance?
No problem.
David's listed. Thank you, David. You anticipated my next pronouncement.